The promise of forever. The rain was falling softly outside the small hospital window. Inside the quiet room, an old woman sat beside a hospital bed, holding the hand of the man she had loved for more than 50 years. Her name was Miriam, and the man lying in the bed was her husband, Hassan. Time had changed them both. Their hair had turned white. Their hands had grown wrinkled, and their bodies were no longer strong. But their love was still the same. Miriam looked at Hassan's tired face and gently brushed his hair back from his forehead. "Do you remember," she said softly, "the first day we met?" Hassan's weak eyes slowly opened. Even though he was very sick, a faint smile appeared on his lips. It had been a long journey together. They had met when they were young. Hassan was a shy man who worked at a small shop in the village, while Miriam was known for her kindness and warm smile. One day, Hassan gathered all his courage and walked to her house with a simple gift and a small box of sweets. He had been so nervous that he almost dropped it while knocking on the door. Miriam laughed quietly as she remembered that moment. "You couldn't even look at me properly," she said. Hassan tried to laugh, but it came out as a weak breath. Their lives had not always been easy. They struggled with money in the early years. Sometimes they didn't even know how they would pay the bills or buy enough food for the family, but they never gave up. Hassan worked day and night, and Miriam took care of their home and their children. Together they built a life full of love, sacrifice, and memories. Now all those years felt like a beautiful dream. Miriam held his hand a little tighter. The doctor had already told her the truth earlier that day. Hassan didn't have much time left, but she didn't want their last moments to be filled with sadness. Instead, she wanted him to remember their life together. "Our children grew up so fast," she whispered. "And now even our grandchildren are almost adults." Hassan slowly turned his head toward her. His voice was very weak, but the words he said made her heart stop for a moment. "Miriam, I need to tell you something." Miriam leaned closer to him, her eyes filled with quiet love. "What is it?" she asked gently. Hassan took a slow breath, because he knew the words he was about to say would be the most important words of his life. The secret Hassan kept. Miriam leaned closer to her husband, her heart beating a little faster. Hassan's breathing was slow and weak, but his eyes were still full of the same warmth she had known all her life. "Miriam, I need to tell you something," he repeated softly. She held his hand gently. "You can tell me anything," she whispered. For a moment, Hassan stayed quiet, as if gathering the strength to speak. Outside the window, the rain continued to fall, tapping softly against the glass. The hospital room felt very still. Finally, Hassan spoke again. "There is something I never told you." Miriam looked at him with surprise. In 50 years of marriage, they had shared almost everything. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. Hassan's eyes filled with emotion. "Do you remember the year when our shop burned down?" Miriam nodded immediately. How could she forget? It had been one of the hardest times in their lives. The small shop that Hassan owned was their only source of income. One night, a fire destroyed everything. For months afterward, they struggled to survive. Miriam had even sold her jewelry to help support the family. "We almost lost everything," she said quietly. Hassan nodded. "Yes, but there is something you never knew." Miriam frowned slightly. "What is it?" Hassan looked at the ceiling for a moment before answering. "The fire, it wasn't an accident." Miriam's eyes widened. "What?" Hassan's voice trembled. "It was caused by someone who was jealous of our business." Miriam couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You knew that?" Hassan slowly nodded. "I found out later." "Then why didn't you tell anyone?" she asked. "Why didn't you tell me?" Hassan looked at her with deep sadness. "Because if I had told the truth, it would have started a fight that could destroy the village." Miriam stayed silent. Hassan continued. "The man who did it was someone we both knew." Her heart began beating faster. "Who was it?" Hassan squeezed her hand weakly. "It was my own cousin." Miriam covered her mouth in shock. She remembered Hassan's cousin, the man who used to visit their shop often. "But why would he do that?" she whispered. Hassan sighed softly. "He believed our success made him look small." Miriam felt a mixture of anger and sadness. All these years, You carried this alone? Hassan nodded. I didn't want revenge. He looked at her lovingly. I chose peace, because our family was more important than anger. Mariam felt tears filling her eyes. Even now, after everything, Hassan was thinking about protecting others. But Hassan wasn't finished yet. There is one more thing I need to tell you, he said. Mariam wiped her tears and leaned closer again. What is it? Hassan's voice became even softer. It's about something I left behind. For you. Mariam's heart skipped a beat. Left behind, she repeated. Hassan slowly nodded. Because before he left this world, there was one final surprise waiting for her.
All these years, he had carried that pain quietly, never letting it destroy their peaceful life. Now he was telling her there was something else, something he had left behind for her. Mariam gently held his hand, afraid that if she squeezed too tightly, he might disappear. What do you mean? She asked softly. Hassan took a slow breath. Speaking had become very difficult for him. Do you remember the old wooden box in our bedroom closet? He whispered. Mariam thought for a moment. Yes, the one you never let anyone touch? Hassan nodded slightly. Inside that box, there is a letter. A letter, she repeated. Yes, he said. I wrote it many years ago. Mariam looked confused. Why would you write a letter when we live in the same house? Hassan smiled weakly. Because I knew one day, I might not be able to say these words to you. Tears slowly formed in Mariam's eyes. She didn't want to hear this. She didn't want to imagine a world without him. You are going to come home, she said quietly, trying to stay strong. Hassan looked at her lovingly, but his eyes told a different story. Mariam, listen to me. She lowered her head slightly. Okay, she whispered. Hassan continued slowly. In that letter, I wrote about everything we built together. Our struggles, our dreams, and how proud I am of our family. Mariam felt her chest tighten with emotion. But that's not the most important part, Hassan added. What is? She asked. Hassan looked toward the window, watching the rain fall. There is something I saved for you. Mariam frowned gently. What did you save? Hassan's voice became very soft. For 40 years, every time our business made a little extra money, I put a small amount aside. Mariam's eyes widened. You did what? I saved it, he said. Little by little. For what? Hassan turned his eyes back to her. For you. Mariam shook her head in disbelief. Hassan, we always shared everything. I know, he said. But this was different. Mariam squeezed his hand. How much did you save? Hassan smiled faintly. Enough for you to live comfortably, without worrying about anything. Tears started rolling down Mariam's cheeks. You never told me. I wanted it to be a surprise, he replied. Mariam's voice trembled. You spent your whole life taking care of us. Hassan shook his head weakly. No, we took care of each other. The room became quiet again. Mariam leaned closer and rested her forehead gently against his hand. I don't want your money, she whispered. I just want you. Hassan closed his eyes for a moment. Then he spoke again, his voice almost a whisper. There is one last thing I need to say to you. Mariam lifted her head slowly, because deep in her heart, she knew these might be his final words. Broken heart.
His last words. Mariam's hands trembled as she held Hassan's weak fingers. The room felt smaller now, quieter than before. Even the sound of the rain outside seemed to fade away. All she could hear was the slow rhythm of Hassan's breathing. There is one last thing I need to say to you, he whispered. Mariam leaned closer, afraid to miss a single word. Her eyes were full of tears, but she tried to smile. I'm listening, she said softly. Hassan looked at her the same way he had looked at her on their wedding day, with love, respect, and admiration. Mariam, you were the best thing that ever happened to me. Her lips trembled. No, she said gently. We were lucky to have each other. Hassan shook his head weakly. You gave me a life full of meaning. He paused for a moment, gathering strength. You stood beside me when we had nothing. Mariam remembered those days clearly. The small rented house, the broken furniture, the nights when they counted coins just to buy food. But they were never unhappy, because they had each other. You believed in me when I doubted myself, Hassan continued. You raised our children with kindness and patience, and you filled our home with warmth. Mariam could no longer hold back her tears. She squeezed his hand gently. You did the same for me, she whispered. Hassan looked at her deeply. Promise me something. Mariam nodded quickly. Anything. After I'm gone, don't spend your days crying. Mariam's heart broke hearing those words. I don't know how not to, she said quietly. Hassan tried to smile. You will.
How?
By remembering our life, not my death. Miriam lowered her head, tears falling onto their joined hands. Hassan continued in a faint voice. Sit in the garden we planted together. Watch the sunsets we always loved. And laugh with our grandchildren. Miriam nodded slowly, trying to stay strong. Hassan took another slow breath. And whenever you feel lonely. Miriam looked up again. Yes? Hassan whispered softly. Talk to me. She looked confused. Talk to you? Yes, he said. I may not answer, but I'll always be listening. Miriam leaned forward and gently kissed his forehead. I will, she promised. Hassan's eyes slowly began to close, but just before they did, he whispered his final words. I will be waiting for you. Where our story began, Miriam held his hand tightly. Hassan. But the room had already become silent. The machines gave a soft, steady tone, and Miriam realized the love of her life had just said goodbye. A love that never ended. The hospital room was silent. Miriam still held Hassan's hand, even though the warmth in it was slowly fading. For a long time, she didn't move. It felt impossible to believe that the man, who had been beside her for more than 50 years, was gone. The nurse gently walked into the room and placed a comforting hand on Miriam's shoulder. I'm sorry, she said softly. But Miriam didn't answer. Her eyes were still fixed on Hassan's peaceful face. He looked calm, almost as if he were sleeping. Finally, Miriam leaned forward and whispered something very quietly. Do you remember? You told me not to cry? Her voice trembled. Well, I'm trying. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She gently kissed his forehead one last time. Then she slowly stood up. That night, Miriam returned home alone for the first time in decades. The house felt different. Too quiet, too empty. Every corner reminded her of Hassan, his favorite chair near the window, the old clock he used to wind every evening, and the garden outside, the garden they had planted together. Miriam walked into their bedroom and opened the closet. Her hands were shaking slightly as she reached for the old wooden box Hassan had mentioned. She carefully opened it. Inside, she found a neatly folded letter. Her heart beat faster as she opened it. The letter was written in Hassan's handwriting. She slowly began to read. My dear Miriam, if you are reading this, it means I couldn't say these words to you in person. I want you to know that loving you was the greatest gift of my life. You were never just my wife. You were my best friend, my strength, and my home. When we were young, I promised to stay with you forever. And even though my body may leave this world, my love never will. Every sunset you watch, every flower in our garden, every laugh of our grandchildren, I will be there with you. So please don't live in sadness. Live the life we built together. And when your time finally comes, I will be waiting for you at the place where our story began. Forever yours, Hassan. By the time Miriam finished reading, tears had soaked the paper. But for the first time that day, she smiled, because she realized something important. Hassan hadn't really left her. He was still in every memory, every laugh, every sunset, and every heartbeat that still carried his love. Miriam walked outside into the garden they had planted together. The rain had stopped. The sky was slowly clearing. She looked up at the stars and whispered softly, I'll see you again, my love. And in that quiet moment, the story of their love didn't end. It simply became eternal.